Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming on over to the Courtyard Marriott. I'm Matt Boudreau, host of the Working Class Audio podcast. I'm also a mixing engineer who's into Atmos, and I think you know who my esteemed friends are here. So we're not going to spend a lot of time with everybody doing bios and such like that. But Steve Genewick, Bob Clearmountain, and Will Kennedy, and Dave Way, and Andrew Scheps, for those who are going to listen to this recording afterwards. So we're going to get into Atmos. We're going to dive right in, and we're not going to mess around. So I'm just going to throw this out first. What convinced you all to get into Atmos? Steve, you want to start?
Yeah, the company I worked for when I worked for Capitol Studios, and they built a room and said, "You're going to mix Atmos. Go." They literally said, "Here's an REM record, and the band will be here in 2 weeks. Have fun, figure it out." And that, to my knowledge, that was the first music-only record that was set to be released. People had done demos and stuff like that. So yeah, and then, because I worked for Universal Music, I was suddenly an Atmos mixer.
You had no choice.
I had no choice. Suddenly I was the Atmos mixer.
You were forced into it. What about you, Will?
Which was great, yeah.
So I have a mixing partner, a producer named Matt Wallace, who you may all know from such records as Maroon 5's Songs About Jane and Faith No More and The Replacements. Matt and I have been working together for about 15 years, on and off and separately. And I guess it was about 2 years ago we started discussing the possibility of doing Atmos. We'd both seen 5.1 kind of come and go, and we were skeptical about it, to be honest, and a friend of ours named Brad Wood said, "I'm going to be doing Atmos. I'm building a system in my studio. This is different. You guys should come by and listen." And we did, and Brad had just done a mix of the latest, in Atmos, the latest Liz Phair record, and there was a tune on there, and I wish I could remember the title, but I always forget. I'm sorry, Brad. And Matt and I were just both blown away by how much emotion came out of it in comparison to the stereo. We both kind of perked up and went, okay, this is different, and we want to be a part of this. So then we were off to the races, and that was sometime during the summer of 2021, and we completely overhauled a studio, and we're up and running by that in November, and then started doing our first Atmos mixes.
Wow. Bob, how about you?
Well, I've been mixing 5.1 starting back from when it was popular for about a minute, 20 some odd years ago. And I just kept doing it because I found it on my SSL, it was really easy to do a stereo mix and a 5.1 at the same time. And so it only added like 5 or 10 minutes to the mix time. And so Universal asked me to mix the first 3 albums for a group called The Band, from one of the bands that I grew up listening to and was a big fan of. I said, sure, yeah. They wanted stereo and 5.1 new mixes with Robbie Robertson, who's an old friend of mine. And so then the Cahoots album came up, and they said, oh, yeah, and this one too, but by the way, can you throw in an Atmos mix as well? And I looked around my room, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. What the hell? And so, I spent 2 weeks upgrading and then kind of mixing that album at the same time almost, and figured out how am I going to monitor this and everything. And then, and that was it. I was off to the races.
Off to the races.
So to speak. And then it was I mixed a record for Joe Bonamassa called Time Clocks. And they just wanted a stereo mix. I said, well, geez, I'm all set up for this now, and I'll just do an Atmos mix of that too. And then now I've been doing it ever since.
Excellent. Dave?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was at, I think, NAMM or AES probably 4 or 5 years ago. They had a booth, PMC had a booth set up, and I remember Steve was in there, and he had a playlist of all these Atmos things that they were playing, and I was like, all right, I gotta check this out. I was a little bit skeptical, walking into the booth, and I think the first song that they played, and most everybody, well, maybe almost everybody would say that they heard probably early on was Rocket Man, the Atmos mix of Rocket Man, and so I heard that, and I could tell that this wasn't just 5-1. This was something, and it was, it was something special. So I got interested in it, stuck around in the booth, and made Steve play a bunch of other different kinds of music to say, oh, how does this kind of music sound and that kind of music? And so I was just kind of watching from the sidelines a bit with an ear towards going that way. And then you, actually, I think we're talking to the Dolby guys, this is a few years ago, and then suggested maybe that, I think it was Carrie, give me a call and talk, and then I talked to Carrie, and then at that point I was kind of ready. So they gave me a little push and were very supportive in trying to get me set up and make me feel like there was going to be work, and and so that was probably about. It's been 3 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew, what about you?
I mean, I've spent my whole career trying to make stuff sound like it's coming from behind you. You know, the first pan scan was like, wait, that's going in circles. That's just not. So I love the idea of something like this, and the fact that it was object-oriented instead of channel-based was huge. I thought, because the channel-based stuff, like, Bob was saying, it's okay for a minute, but unless you get people to put up that many speakers, it doesn't work. And this was completely different, so that felt like that was going to be good. I heard the stuff at the PMC booth, heard a bunch of Steve's mixes that were awesome, talking to Dolby, all that same stuff, and I just had a huge list in my head of all the stuff I'd done myself for like little indie bands that I wanted to go back and revisit. And then everybody did say that like you'll be drowning in work. Which of course, we've learned is not necessarily the case.
Define drowning.
Sure, we're going to get into all of the other things that go with it. But yeah, I mean, I love the idea of it, and the technology behind it made it make so much more sense to me than any of the pure multi-channel formats.
Do you all feel that the emergence of Atmos is similar to the rise of stereo in the days of mono? Is it similar in any way in terms of the monumental change?
I think it's similar that people are, back in those days, were trying to figure out what to do with stereo. They didn't really know. Of course, most of the recordings were either 3-track or 4-track, and so there wasn't a lot of choices. But it's similar in that way that people are still trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with this? What do I do with the height speakers? What do I do with the center channel, which is a big debate all the time? And so, yeah, it's similar that way that people are trying to, and the dust hasn't settled on it, which is a good thing, I think, because there's all these different approaches that people are taking, and it's fascinating in that sense.
Do you all feel that there's a natural approach to it? Like, there's the band in front of you kind of approach, a bit like your Stones mix of Live at the Elmo Combo. There's that approach. There's also you're in the middle of the band approach. Is there an approach that any of you subscribe to right out of the gate, or do you just kind of just take it as what the material is?
Song by song for me. I mean, I've done all of the above. I've done crazy stuff flying around the room, and I've done jazz records that are, nobody's flying around the room. And it really depends on the song. Every single time, I listen, okay, this is what today is. What's it going to be? Is it going to be crazy, or is it going to be, they both work. They're both, you can make a compelling mix both ways. The problem is when you do a crazy mix on something that should not be crazy. That's a problem.
Right, I agree with everything you just said.
But it's really like, so I just, as I'm listening to usually I get a stereo mic, obviously, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, you just make it up.
I know early in Matt's and my sort of adventure with Atmos, and to this day we say this a lot because we're still kind of educating clients a lot of the time as we're doing the mixes, that yes, we can make everything a roller coaster ride where things are flying all around the room, but whether or not that's appropriate to the material is what's important. And thinking about not just the first time somebody's going to listen to it, but the 5th, the 10th, the 20th, are they going to want to hear that at that point? And was the material appropriate to have that happen? Or is it more just about putting something beautiful in a great space and allowing them to enjoy it?
Yeah. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's definitely still early days, and we're learning and watching how other people do things, and I was talking with Bob last night about he uses the center speaker I think more than most other guys do, and and I listen. I was like, what? I gotta do more of that. It's just like, but there's so many different ways of using. If you use a lot of objects, if you don't use a lot of objects, about compression and how you're going to deal with the gluing of things, reverbs, how you want to spread out your reverb. So there's so much room to contemplate, right? That was the first big difference. Was just like, well, okay, where do I want to put this? There's so much room. So I'm sure maybe the guys who were going from mono to stereo felt a little bit like that. They still only had 3 choices and blends in between, but we've got a lot of figuring out still to go. And then I'm sure, like as happens with regular stereo mixes, there will be trends and there will be things will be looked at 5-10 years from now when we go back to these, and we'll be like, oh, what were we thinking? What was, so, and there'll be something will break through in a way that we hadn't really considered, and we'll all want to do that kind of thing, and
And then we'll be drowning in remixes.
Yes, well, that's an interesting point, because, I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be, just like the way, there are remixes of stereo things, and they're re-released and repackaged, all that. I think we'll want to go back. I certainly want to go back sometime. It's only been 3 years,
Andrew, what about you in terms of what do you think is the natural way of dealing with it?
I think what Steve said, I mean, there are 5/1 mixes where the song is destroyed. There are stereo mixes where the song is destroyed. I mean, I think so much of our job mixing in stereo is to figure out the panning that got the groove right but left room for the vocal, made the guitar arrangement make sense. So that's a huge part of it. So there's some songs where I can rip everything apart and the front wall is still carrying the song, and other songs where all I can do is make it so if you switch to the stereo, it kind of collapses a bit, and then oh right, it is filling up the room, but you don't even know. And that can be song to song on the same record. And I think the other part of it is 99% of the stuff we're mixing right now was built for a stereo arrangement.
Yeah.
And I think the two things about that is the artists who actually make it into a studio to hear it, you can see the light bulb light up. And then the next record is going to have things that are built for it because it's what's in their head, and they'll be writing and arranging, keeping that in mind. And I think that that's when it will start to get even more interesting. And some people are like, well, yeah, but how do you track in Atmos? And you don't. But it's pretty easy to track in quad. You can get a pair of speakers behind you and know you have enough guitars to fill up the room and things like that. So stuff like that is going to change it completely again, I think.
Did it take any of you a chunk of time to kind of figure out well, how does this all work? And not just the technical, but just the mixing approach. What can I do with this? I think you probably had a head start with your 5/1 work.
Well, yeah, it made it a lot easier. Yeah, because it was just an extension of that. Really.
And Steve, I think you were one of the earliest people doing it. Did you struggle with I don't know, where do I put this guitar, that vocal, or this effect, and do I have stuff flying around? Did it take you a certain amount of time to get up to speed in your mixing process?
Yes, and the problem I had when I started was you couldn't listen to it. There was nothing was being released. We knew it was coming, and in hindsight, we knew that there was deals with Amazon and all these other people, but we didn't know that at the time. So literally, for the first 2 years I mixed, if you didn't know me or somebody that worked at Capitol, you couldn't hear an Atmos mix, basically. So the other thing was, it was well, how are people going to hear this? And I was like, I don't know. Nobody knows. I don't know what this is going to be. The first couple times, if I wanted to hear my mix in a different room, I had to go to the movie. Dolby had a movie theater across the street from Capitol. I had to go there to listen to it. So it was kind of like trying to figure out, okay, is this going to work? And then I hope this works when it comes out, because I don't know what, there's going to be these smart speakers and these so yeah, it was a crapshoot on 2 levels is my point.
Right.
So yeah, it was trying to figure out how to make it work in the room I'm sitting in, and then geez, I hope this works when it comes out. Luckily it did.
Yeah.
So I mean,
you
happy.
arrived at a point where you felt like, I'm confident now, I can put out a mix and know it's gonna.
Yeah, but took a minute to figure out how to anchor stuff where I wanted it to stay. And I've told the story before. I was doing that first REM record, and I was like, oh, I can put, let's pull the vocal into the room and put it places. And then I would get up and walk around, and I realized the vocal was following me around the room, and it was kind of creepy. And I was like, all right, I have to figure out how to get this to stay where I want it. Cut to 2 years later, I was mixing a Marilyn Manson record, and I put the vocal in all the speakers, so when you walk around the room, it's really creepy and it follows you. Again, very appropriate. So
He's creepy.
right, but I had to. But yeah, figuring out how to get stuff to stay where I wanted it, but still move, and so yeah, it took a while. Luckily, I had, the time and the place to do it. I didn't have people over my shoulder all the time going,
Yeah.
do this stuff, So yeah, it's fun.
Will?
Yeah, one of the earliest mixes that Matt and I did was the B-52's Love Shack, and that was an incredible learning experience because we thought, being sort of early in our experience, like Steve was talking about, like, oh, there's so much going on in this song, we'll be able to pull this out and put it all around the room, and it'll just sound like the song's coming from everywhere, and we did that. And we thought we had something really great. And then we flipped back to the stereo, and it was really wrong. And we very quickly realized that what we should have known from the start, which is Don is an amazing producer. And he built that mix to work in stereo. Everything was a brick in a wall that fit a very specific place in front of you. So what we were doing was essentially pulling bricks out of the middle of the wall and trying to build another wall over here and another wall behind us, and it didn't work. So we ended up having to scoot everything back towards the front, kind of made the band more of a, what we did is turned it more into a, you're at the party, right? They have those party tracks, you hear the cheering and the clapping that goes on through the whole song, and we managed to do it in a way that put that behind you, so you felt like you were at the party, but you were watching sort of a more a higher fidelity version of the band in front of you. And boy, have we thought about that on probably every mix we've done since, where we're always wondering, like, okay, is this one where we can split it out and have things coming at you from everywhere, or is there an idea of, no, this is what was meant in the production, and we have to kind of keep it more glued together, in a tighter space.
Can I just jump in? Like, from now on, we should call that the Mullet mix, because it's business up front, party in.
I love that.
All right.
Mullet mixing.
All right, I'm out.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes.
What about you, Bob?
A new standard, just what we need.
The Find One thing, you had already had your experience, but we're going from a channel-based setup to an object-based setup. So did that change anything for you, or did you just say, I have more speakers now?
Well, I don't use objects very much.
Okay.
I mean, I'm mixing off an analog desk, so I only have 2 extra buses for moving objects. I mean, my height speakers are 4 stationary objects, basically. Well, I move them once in a while, but generally they don't move. And so I think that's a good limitation to have.
Yeah.
From some mixes that I've heard that make me dizzy to listen to. I just
Right.
go, whoa, man, this stuff's moving around so much. So everything, I mix rock music basically. And so I'm not mixing EDM. It'd be different if I was mixing EDM music where
Right.
you got a bunch of noises, synth sounds that can be, you can go crazy with that stuff. But with the kind of thing that I do, it is more like a stage. And but I think of it like sitting in the middle of a imaginary studio where the band is all playing live, right? And then I like the idea, okay, this guy's standing over there playing guitar, the singer's in the front, the drums are in the front, there's keyboards in the back maybe. Mm-hmm. If I have strings and horns, I usually put them in the back. And so you're surrounded. I like being surrounded by the music, I really do. And there are some records that shouldn't do that for
Right,
sure.
yeah.
They should really be glued together, like you're saying, And in fact, I've done some that I think, I don't know if this really works.
But you did Some Girls by the Stones, right? In Atmos?
No,
at least-
I did. No, not Some Girls. I did Tattoo You,
Tattoo You.
but
Okay.
I haven't done it in Atmos yet. I've remixed the Bryan Adams Reckless album in Atmos, which, I don't know if that really. I shouldn't say it doesn't work because I want people to go back and go and listen to it.
Well, and it's
But-
in rock music. Do you find it difficult because you start to unglue, or as Will said, take
Yeah.
the wall apart, and it starts to collapse a little bit?
Well, it's just that the power in a lot of rock music, the power should come from the front because a rock band is they usually perform on a stage, and it's interesting because I did some of Bryan Adams. He recut a bunch of his singles, and there was one song where I had the electric guitars coming out of the side speakers, keyboards in the back, and the acoustic guitars in the front. And he said, the power should be in the front. Put the electric guitars in the front, and then we can put the acoustic guitars, and it works so much better. So acoustic guitars, it kind of worked in the sides, and you had a couple of guys playing there, but the main thing was coming out of the front, the drums, bass, and guitars. And but it's like like you said, every record's different. It really is. I mixed a bunch of Marley stuff. In fact, I did 5/1 Marley, and I've now just. The label doesn't know it yet, but I've redone them all in Atmos.
They do now.
And
They're not listening.
I'm going to give it to the label, by the way, when I'm done with the record, because I haven't finished. I'm going to just give it and not ask for any money. Just put
a
it
fan.
up,
Yeah.
because this is good. And but you're sitting in the middle of the room while they're recording. It's like an imaginary. Of course, there's a lot of overdubs on it, but the listener doesn't know that. They think it's all live. And you want them to think it's live, and you want them to look around and say, "Oh, there's the organ and the piano guys are back there, fucking chugging away, and it's like amazing." And not only that, but you can walk around and hear what each guy's doing if you want to.
I did some test mixes for the Rolling Stones. They gave me some stuff, some Goat's Head Soup tracks that because they wanted to do the right. So like, can you mix these songs and we'll bring the band in to listen, and as I pulled especially Rolling Stones from the early '70s, as I pulled them apart, it was like, wow, like are these guys listening to the same?
Right.
Like I'm not sure they're playing the same song. And you put it back together and you go, oh, that's brilliant. Like so, it just didn't want to come apart. That's one of those ones that was like, yeah, you can't really. The song went away.
Did you guys do test mixes early on to kind of figure out like where your comfort level was to get confidence in your mixing?
The first mix I did with Steve, and it was an album that I produced knowing that I was going to mix it in Atmos, and it was pretty much a live album. But the idea of it was you're in the middle of the room and all the guys are spread out. So it was like Hawaiian music. So one ukulele's here and another steel guy's here, vibraphone here, bass over there. And so the idea was because I remember when I first decided, okay, Atmos, I really was like, I don't want it to just be kind of exaggerated stereo. I was like, I really want to use the whole room.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it worked for that first project, because I had to think about the panning while we were recording and knowing, okay, this guy's going to be there, that guy's going to be there. And it went great, and it worked for that music. And then the next project I did was a rock thing, and I think I had somewhat of an idea still of using the whole space. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, no, this for rock music in particular, where there's the idea of a band, where there's a power center, right? And like even when you're mixing in stereo, you still think of like the middle as where the power comes from, right? And then there's maybe some others, the more decorative stuff is maybe on the outside. Right. But that's kind of now, translating to, call it exaggerated stereo, where it's just still kind of front-centered, a group, but then you've got, tickle me stuff in the back here and there, and maybe it expands with the arrangement of the song. And that's another thing is some music has a lot of overdubs where you can really play around and have a lot of options, and some of it's just kind of like a couple of extra guitars that come in the chorus and maybe a shaker and a tambourine or a keyboard part you're fairly limited in how much you're gonna tickle behind you.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a learning curve, and I love working on all different styles of music because they all ask for a different type of treatment.
Yeah, they really do.
So and like I said, it's still early days, and I kind of can't wait till my next mix so I can kind of either try something new or rethink something that I thought I had figured out already.
Yeah.
Yep.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think I got lucky because one of the first things I did was the 1975's catalog. So I had 3 out of their 4 records to do, which meant not only did I have a ton of songs to do, but I also had a good chunk of time. And I did most of it twice and some of it 3 times because I learned so much doing the first record. Like, okay, cool. Got to the second record, like, okay, I was a dumbass. Got to the third record and then circled back around, did all of it, and then went back to the first record and did a couple of songs after I'd figured out. Because it's not just the figuring out, like the important part is figuring out when are you going to destroy the song.
Right.
But then it's also you get an idea in your head and you've never done anything like that. Like I've got this pinpoint reverb. So it's a mono reverb, but it's into a 7/1 track. So if I pan the send, the reverb follows it. So, because you start off thinking, I need expansive reverbs, so I'm going to make them out of 3 stereo reverbs with a 4th one and you do all this stuff, and then you realize I need a mono spring that I can put anywhere in the room I want. And then once you've done that once, you think, oh. And I'd still go back and change some of the early ones.
Yeah, well, I really need 3 monos.
7 monos.
So the learning curve in terms of the technical stuff is huge. Just figuring out like what you can do and how are you going to do it, because at first you don't even have the ideas because we haven't been doing it.
Right. So Will, you and Matt do this tag team mixing thing, and that presents a whole nother level of doing all of this. How do you handle that?
So I think that one of the things, the first thing that makes it successful for us is that we have such a long history of working together. When I first moved to Los Angeles in 2005, 2006, I had worked in Nashville and New York before that. Matt and I hooked up pretty early on, and I engineered for his productions pretty much from that point forward, a lot from like 2006 to 2010, and then on and off during the 2010s. So we had developed this shorthand of communication, which comes in really handy now. And we also developed a really good working knowledge of what one another's strengths and weaknesses are. So the way Matt describes it is, I'm the guy, I'm the technical guy, I'm the details guy. He's more the mix with my elbows guy. Like, he likes to get in and just crank knobs and change settings and go nuts with stuff. And then I can sit down and go, wow, that's an awesome idea I wouldn't have thought of, but maybe let's rein that in a little bit, or make it go further if that's what it needs. So we just complement each other really well that way. And even though, from a financial standpoint, it doesn't necessarily make as much sense as working by yourself, for us, the results we feel are better than either of us could achieve alone. And the other big thing is, I think we've all experienced, you spend 6, 8, 10 hours working on a mix, and eventually you just get tired, and you know what, I gotta set this aside. Whatever problems I'm having, I'll come back in the morning and probably hear them right away. Whereas Matt and I now have this incredible luxury of bumping up against that wall and then going, hey, why don't you jump in and see if you can crack this? And usually the other person can, and then the first person comes back in and sits down and goes, wow, that's totally what we were looking for. So it's really cool.
I think why don't more people mix together, have mixing teams, because it's such a great idea for all those reasons you just mentioned, but I guess it's the financial side. It's like they'd have to pay us twice as much.
But especially in this, because you and I did it.
Yeah,
Couple
that was
records,
great.
and it was
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
because you would go, "What if we did this?" And, oh, wow, I never thought
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You know, and then you go, "I don't know how to do it," but,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then I would have to figure out how to do it, which I think was why I was there. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, having another set of ears to, you know, I always say, like, any mix, even in stereo, like, I got to hear it through somebody else's ears. Somebody else has to sit in the chair and listen. It could be the artist, it could be
That helps.
my kid, it could
Right.
be whatever, and I need to sit over here and
Right.
watch them and
All of
see
a sudden
what
it sounds
is.
different when you
Totally
see them
different.
listening.
Yeah. Or you know, suddenly they do that and you go, "Oh shit." Like, was
Yeah.
that good or bad?
Yeah,
That
exactly.
thing came
What
up
happened
over
right
there.
there?
Like, so yeah, I love having more people. Like, I miss Capitol because I miss having
Right.
people just walk in and go, "Here, you sit down and listen to it." Like, they have nothing to do with it. They're the guy next door, but you know, they come in and listen to it. It's so yeah, I think it's very valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about catalog versus frontline work. Catalog work, of course, seems to be what a lot of people are clamoring for, but the reality is that it takes a lot of effort for some of you, and I think, Will, you and Matt have done, like, I don't know, what, 150 plus or like close to 200, you know, remixes at this point.
Yeah.
That effort that goes into recreating the stereo and then getting into the Atmos. Do you all like the catalog work? Do you prefer the more current material you're working on now because you have ready access to the tracks? You know, what are the pros and cons of this catalog work? Anybody?
I haven't done much of that.
I think that because we've done, I'd say we're about 50-50 frontline and catalog at this point. I don't know that we have a preference. The frontline work in some ways is easier because, at least at this point, the way the workflow goes is the stereo mix is getting done first. And they're always making stems at this point, and then generally speaking, we're working from the stems. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel there. You know, the artist and the producer and the mixer have spent a long time trying to come up with a vibe, and our job is not to change that. It's to try and present it differently, but maintain what it is that they meant, you know, the feelings they were trying to get across. And it's certainly easier to mix from stems. Sometimes we do have to go back and say, you know, like, okay, in Atmos, this drum stem, while it sounds great in stereo and Atmos, we need to have a little control over the snare drum or the kick drum because it's not speaking in the way that you intended it in the stereo mix, and we'll have them split out extras. The catalog work, most of the time, we're doing recreations of the stereo mixes, which is hard work. I would say, you know, and it's as hard, if not harder, sometimes than mixing from scratch because we have to make it feel the way it felt before. Like I was talking about the B-52s thing. I distinctly remember thinking as we were working on it, I don't want us to be the jerks who ruined Love Shack for an entire generation of fans. And we spent days making sure that we got every detail. We actually had fans of the band. I was a huge fan of that song. And I kept chasing tiny little things where Matt was going, no, it's fine. Like, it's not going to be fine. And then we had fans come in and hear it and go, oh, you know, it's close, but you're missing this or you're missing that. And that process can be really grueling. It can also be really rewarding. I love it when we can have an artist come back and hear their thing in a way that still pleases them the way the stereo version did, but with this new dimension to it. So yeah, I think those are the pros and the cons of it. And obviously the catalog stuff takes longer. We also charge more for it when we're working from multi-tracks.
It takes a lot longer. I literally just last week and a half, mixed a record that Al Schmidt had mixed originally. I was there. I know what he did. I wrote it down. We mixed the record in 2 days in stereo. Al got nominated for a Grammy for Best Engineer and everything. Took me a week and a half to redo it because I had to. I could have mixed it in 2 days too. It was orchestral record. It was an easy mix, but trying to recreate what he did. I mean, first of all, I can't do that. Nobody can. But even knowing exactly what he used and exactly where it was and exactly how he would do stuff and all that kind of stuff, it still took me, again, took him 2 days, took me 9 days or whatever. So it's hard.
It's hard to know. It's hard to transcribe fader rides.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like that's the hardest part.
Yes.
Because you think you're listening for a general balance, right? And you're like, okay, the strings are like this loud, right? And the drums are this loud or whatever. But then you don't know that when it got to the bridge, like, those strings were pumped up
Right.
7 dB.
Or that one cello line was the one that the artist went,
and
"Can we
so,
just bring that little thing up?" Yeah.
you're kind of having to chase all these things where it's like, why doesn't it sound good? And it's like, oh, it was just a ride. But you can't, it's very hard to kind
Or
of hear that.
or even that they made that move with the strings, like, oh, that's a 10 dB fader ride on the strings, but now the strings are coming out of their own set of speakers.
Yeah,
So-
and you really hear a ride.
Yeah, so
Or it
the
doesn't
ride
need
that
it.
was, now maybe you don't need it. So yeah, it's the interpretation is really difficult sometimes.
And subtle ones too. They make a difference. You just do a 2
Absolutely.
dB or whatever, but it really changes the feel.
Sure.
And it's very hard to, if you weren't there, even when you were there, as
Yeah.
you just said.
So you kind of have to do the stereo mix, duplicate the stereo mix first.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's hard. No,
Yeah,
so
and then-
when you're doing, like Bob Marley or something like that, you're really kind of treating it as a separate mix.
No,
right?
no, I'm actually A-being to
You
the
are. So
original.
so okay.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And
Yeah, so I'm trying to keep the feel of the original one, and I do that first. I mean, I spend more time on the stereo
Yeah.
mix than I do on the Atmos, to be honest.
Right.
You know, it's pretty much with any Atmos mix that I do, no matter what it is.
Right.
You know,
You're
I'll get
listening
the
mostly
stereo
to-
mix. It's got to sound good as a song musically, and then I pull it apart, and then it's got to still sound. It's got to still work. You know,
You're pulling it
musically.
apart though as you're listening in stereo.
Yeah,
Like,
I
not
am.
really listening to it. It's spread apart, and then you just kind of open it up for a second, and you're kind of doing it with your
Yeah.
mind.
Well, as I'm doing the stereo, I'm assigning channels just in my imagination
Right,
as
right,
to,
yeah,
oh, this might work back there, or this might work over there, and then when I switch my monitor over, I go, oh, well, that's not so good. You know?
Let me ask. So there's going to be a lot of engineers who want to get into Atmos, and the temptation is to get into it as cheaply as possible because it can be of great expense with the amount of speakers we're talking about. What area of the setup process should engineers not cheapen out on? What area is super important in your mind, knowing what you know now, and what tools are available to us now?
Well, it's the interface. Obviously, you got to start with the Apogee. Not to plug anything. I mean, I've got nothing to do with that.
Not at all.
Sorry.
So if I buy an Apogee, all my mixes will sound like a Bob.
Yeah, right, that's how
Is
it
that
works.
what- Okay, I'm in.
Yeah. Worth whatever they're charging.
Yeah.
Sorry. Kind of a little joke.
I thought it was a
The
Waves
wife-
compressor.
Your wife will
appreciate
Okay, yeah, of course.
She's listening right now. She just checked out. She's like, okay.
But speakers, interface, like what?
I think the monitor controller is super important
Yeah.
because if
It
you don't have
really
an
is,
easy
actually.
way to turn it up and down, you're screwed.
Okay.
If
And
you
to
know
compare
your
to
stereo, it's
stereo.
like you
Saying
can.
the same thing that I just said.
There are people, literally oratones duct taped to boards on top of gobos behind them who are doing amazing work, and I'm not making this up. That's like a real thing.
Right.
People can mix records anywhere. They get used to anything, but just to be able to get that many channels of audio running where they're supposed to run, where you can switch back and forth to the stereo.
Yeah,
It's difficult, and it's really, really important. I would say.
exactly what I was just saying.
Yeah, the Apogee makes it super easy, doesn't it?
I think the one thing to caution is I'm still a firm believer of if you have not done like hundreds of Atmos mixes, you're not going to be able to do it in headphones.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Yes.
That was going to be my next question. How do you feel about engineers getting into it and saying, "Oh, I can do this cheaply. I can just get a great pair of headphones and do
Yeah,
it."
there's nothing in the front. I
Yeah.
can pick them out like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It just doesn't. I mean, if you've done it, but like when lockdown happened, a lot of us went to our homes and we would especially at Universal, we would start mixes in headphones. I mean, we had the ability to then go to places and listen to it, but we had all been doing it for years, so we kind of knew what worked and what didn't work. And I know if I put this back there, it's going to sound weird. So we had, and there are times still where I might actually start something in headphones, but I always go back to the speaker. It's really not a viable. I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to figure it out. It's because somebody always figures it out, but it's not. I don't think you can go, I can just get the software and do this in headphones.
I couldn't do it. I don't think. I'm
It's not
pretty
gonna
sure.
happen. Yeah.
No, maybe somebody can.
Thoughts?
Not me.
I'm looking at you.
I spend.
Right?
I mean, I
What's the
think.
correct answer? You're gonna tell
No,
us.
I think of the people at the table, I spend probably 500 times more time in headphones than anyone else here because I
Right.
just do it because there's a caravan involved, and I'm not going to talk about why that's important, but it was really cold in there, so I didn't want to mix where my speakers were. So anyway, I've gotten really used to it, but for me, while I'm setting up, whether it's stereo or Atmos, I am in headphones because also when I don't do that, sometimes you finally okay, you obviously have to check it in headphones. The headphone playback is super important. And then you realize you've really screwed something up. And now your speaker mix is no good either because you've got to get it working in headphones. So I'll generally okay, going back and forth to the stereo, this works. And then I can do whatever I want and go nuts with it. And it'll usually still work.
That makes sense.
I know we stole. So I both Matt and I have done it both ways now, where we started on speakers and on headphones on your recommendation, actually. And I'd say that we probably are 50-50 between the headphones and the speakers because I feel like both of them will point out things that you need to adjust in the other, and you're constantly making adjustments back and forth because the headphone right now, that's most of our audience by a long stretch is headphones. The thing that concerns me long term about people who haven't done you have a speaker setup and you have a lot of experience doing the mixes, so your imagination for what's going on in the headphones is going to be really good. For someone who doesn't have that experience, it's hard unless you're really clear on if I move this thing to the back or to the heights and what that's going to sound like in the speakers. Because ultimately the headphone experience is evolving where the speaker experience is going to stay much more static over time. The mix that you make today, unless you've checked it against a speaker mix, could change dramatically from what you intended between now and a year from now or 5 years from now. So you really have to
the
be on
speaker
top
mix
of
is the
both.
master, period.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
ADM is the master, everything else is made from it.
Yeah.
Just like the wave is the master, the MP3 is not.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's not what most of the clients or audience are listening to. So.
No, true. I mean, it has to work
Yeah.
in headphones, but still, the point of it is everybody's going to have an Atmos setup at home at some point. That's what you hope.
Tell you what, for me, it's just not as much fun in headphones.
Yeah, right.
I'm listening on my
No, exactly.
my 7.1.4 system, and that, I really like it. And if I had to just do it in headphones, I wouldn't do it. I'm sorry.
But I think it's the same
Hey,
argument.
maybe I'm
No,
older than
I
everybody
agree.
here, and I'm I don't care that
Yeah, I'm
much.
not advocating for it at all, but I think it's just like with stereo to say you could just go get a pair of headphones and mix in stereo. Well, can you? It's not because they're headphones, it's because good mixers are good mixers and bad mixers are bad mixers. I think, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree, though.
All
I
right.
agree with you.
So let's talk about this. This is a little bit of a controversial topic that ruffles some feathers, pisses off some of my friends. There's a faction. Well, faction would be dramatic. There's groups of Atmos engineers who are open to the idea that since many of us have tuned rooms and we're mixing to a particular level, that mastering engineers are not needed in this process. So let's discuss. I'm not taking any
You
side.
want to go there?
I want to go there.
I'll
So,
be over here. in
You'll
the
be over
corner.
there. Okay.
I'm joining you.
In the left rear speaker.
Right.
I'll just say that there is not a single Atmos project I've done except for maybe one that had a budget for it.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what we say about it.
Yeah.
Nobody can afford to pay for it. They can barely afford us. And we're doing it for way less than the stereo mixes, at least I am.
I like the idea of another ear
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
final
Yeah.
mix. For me, but of course I don't have two people. that do the
Well,
tag
neither of us are
things.
mastering engineers.
It's just me. It's just nice to have somebody else give a listen, especially when it comes to how loud the sub should be, you know, the LFE and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's,
Yeah.
you know, I
Little
just want
guardrail.
somebody to check it and maybe make little adjustments if need be.
Dave, you've had stuff mastered, right?
Yeah, and actually, one of the things that Bob did for us too is master. But it's like just a couple, and nobody really seems to expect it or ask for it.
Right.
It's more like if we can have the luxury of handing it off to somebody that we trust, and that's another thing. It's like it's hard to figure out now who do you trust with this kind of thing, the way you usually have a relationship with a mastering engineer, because you don't have enough of a chance to do it. So I'm still in that process. I'd love to find somebody that I feel like
That you can
they're-
afford.
Yeah,
just
that
like
they're gonna
Andrew
be able
said.
to do, yeah.
Yeah,
budgets
but
are
the
tough.
couple of times it has happened, it's been great,
Yeah.
and it has helped.
But
So
it's
I'm
tough.
not advocating against it. It's just not
No,
part
you're
of
right.
the
It's-
process on most
It's
of my
expensive.
mixes.
Yeah, mastering,
And-
and it should be expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know?
Where it's going to start coming up, and we had these discussions early on, was when you start having, like in stereo, records that are mixed by 2 or 3 people.
Right.
Yeah.
Where then you need somebody that can put,
Then
especially
then
in
it's really
Atmos,
important,
because
yes.
it's a lot of technical stuff too
Or a
that has to
compilation.
happen.
Absolutely.
Where that has to go together.
Yeah.
Then obviously you need somebody that can do that.
To make it all
yeah.
work together.
I would be perfectly happy with handing it off to somebody just to do the freaking levels and just
Yeah,
to take
and
care of
not-
all the
Right.
computer work would
And
be
even
fine.
when you're just
but-
mixing, to not have to be thinking about the mastering of
Right.
it too, knowing that
Yeah.
nobody's going to master it, and you got to try and make
Right.
it sound like, the stereo mix that was completely obliterated without completely
The other
obliterating
thing,
it.
as we sit here in 2023, there are really not a lot of mastering tools for anybody,
Yeah.
whether it be the mixer or the mastering engineers. So there's really not a lot that anybody can do outside of the mixing process. So for me, it hasn't come up. I do quote unquote mastering as part of my mixing process. I have not had a need to go to another person yet. I'm not saying they do a bad job. I'm not against it. It hasn't come up for me yet.
I would say the closest thing we seem to have is the Dolby album assembler with the ability to
do a
EQ
bit
and
of
limit
stuff,
across the whole
And I
ADM.
use that. I absolutely use it.
Yeah. So in terms of the car test these days, what are you all using to check your mixes on consumer gear, or are you?
Well, I got 3 of those Lucids now. That come with that one.
Right, got a
We had
Tesla, a
one-
Rivian.
We had
yeah.
a Lucid last night for our little get together, and yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
They kind of nailed it.
Really? I didn't
Yeah.
listen. I should have. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Should've
here.
checked it
It's
out.
at the.
Oh, it's
It's
here.
a PMC booth has
PMC booth has the car in the booth.
not right next to it. Yeah.
But it's
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
It starts at $100,000 though, so it's a little out of.
That's an
out of my
expensive
range.
car
Yeah, that's
test,
a
Bob.
weird car test.
But
Cheaper than the Atmos system, though.
Yeah. Exactly.
you're right. But I know I got your point that okay, where do you listen to your mixes?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
there is no,
Yeah.
unless you're really rich. There's no car test.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm looking forward to when it gets to be more of a normal thing. you know,
Yeah.
For Atmos.
I've got a 5.1 thing in my living room, so I'll take
Yeah.
the MP4 and listen to that, which is good because that's how a lot of consumers will end up
Yeah.
listening to it.
Or
the
Sonos.
Sonos. Yeah.
Sonos is cool.
I have a sound bar.
I'm glad to see
Yeah.
that they're starting now. There's new Sonos that's Atmos ready, and
Yeah.
the Apple
There's a few things.
HomePod, and there's I think Bose maybe. I'm not sure if Bose has something
Probably.
coming out. Yeah, but
Sennheiser's got a
that's
sound
that's
bar
what
that's
we
pretty
really
good.
need is like some nice sounding consumer, for like $1,000, $2,000,
Well,
somewhere in
that's-
that price range that people can be hooked up and really start to feel it the way we feel it. Because
Yeah, that's
that's
the trick.
when that's going.
That's when it's going to start to get popular.
Yeah.
At least then maybe somebody on the street will have heard of what Atmos that it
Really
even
is.
exists.
Yeah.
But so far,
There's still
it's
a
hard to
lot
find
I'm
anybody
still
that
amazed.
you say Atmos to most people that aren't in the business, and they go, "What? What are you talking
Right.
about?"
Well, so, and that brings up this question, Atmos compared to DTSX, RO3D, Sony 360, and now, Apple calls it spatial audio, and God knows what Spotify is going to call it when it eventually does it. Is there a particular reason you all are mixing in Atmos versus these other formats, or are you mixing in those other formats?
Well, we're mixing in the VHS and not the Betamax.
Right. Are we in that moment? Is this the VHS
I think
Betamax
so.
moment?
I think the dust better settle. Otherwise, it's going to go the way of 5.1 if everybody doesn't agree on one thing. Because otherwise, it's confusing enough for us.
Right.
But for consumers, okay, what 360? What? What am I listening to? And you know what I mean?
Well,
It's like too
why
much.
did you all choose Atmos and not
'Cause
the other formats?
Dolby has more power, I think, than Sony.
Well, and that's what Apple Music adopted,
Yeah, that's
There
the
you
main
go.
thing. I think you've hit it on the head, really.
right? Because I know that was
Because they're really
Game
pushing
changer.
it.
Yeah.
when we were talking about doing our switch over to immersive mixing, that was the starting gun.
Yeah.
Was okay, there's going to be a demand for this because
Apple's
as much as we
pushing
like
it.
it, but because Apple's pushing it.
I think you're
Yeah, but
totally
you can
right.
deliver 360 and stuff to Apple. That's why Apple
Yeah.
calls it spatial, because it's not.
Because it's not all
Right.
Right.
And I've had to do 360 mixes of quite a few of the records I've done in Atmos, but I don't think I've ever not had to do an Atmos mix.
Right.
Yeah,
Nobody's
exactly.
asking you
Right.
No one
specifically
said
for that.
360 only.
I tell you what, this Springsteen's sort of a cover album that I mixed in Atmos. At first they said, "Oh yeah, you got to deliver Atmos and 360 because it's Sony."
Right.
Right, and then they halfway through, don't worry about the 360.
Yeah.
Just the Atmos.
Why do you think that
I
was?
have no idea,
Oh,
but
you
it
were
was
happy.
We just had a
Thank you.
similar experience.
Yeah.
I had one for Sony that went, "Can you do a 360?" And I said, "No." And they went, "Okay, fine."
Correct.
Yeah.
Just because I didn't
Yeah.
have the capability where I was,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to personally. But
Um,
I had
even know
enough
how to
problems
do it.
getting up on running on one system.
Right.
I don't need to do this.
You don't need
three
to learn
more
a
times.
whole new thing.
No.
Okay.
Capacity is.
All right. So
Versus
since,
the
since,
capacity.
I'm glad you did that. Better for us.
since we're talking Atmos, let's talk about the Dolby curve. The use of the curve is something that seems to ruffle feathers, and I want somebody here to explain the logic behind it and if you agree with it or not, because I've heard a range of opinions. Some people are like, screw that, we're
Looking at
shutting
you.
it
I'm
off.
looking at you. Yeah.
So Dolby curve.
Explaining something technical, we defer to you there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm going to get some of this wrong. The Dolby curve is because of films, and those have known playback parameters. You know what you're playing them back on, so that makes perfect sense. And to me, for music, it's just like, who cares what you've got in your studio? If it translates, you're awesome, and if it doesn't, it's broken.
Right.
So if you want to EQ with the Dolby curve and it works for you, fantastic. And if you don't, you turn it off.
And if you're mixing without it on, do you think that, like I've heard people talk about, I've heard the film thing, I've heard people talk about, oh, that's to compensate for, the consumer devices. I don't know if that's accurate.
There are reasons for all this stuff, like you have to deliver at -18 integrated loudness, but that's because if all of a sudden you've got 16 channels of stuff that's all going to the center, you're going to clip the crap out of the
Right.
center. So that is a safe level to do things at.
Right.
It's also like 25 dB quieter than anything I've ever mixed, which is hard. I have mixes at plus stuff, which is hard to do.
Wait, it's 25 dB.
Yeah,
I'm trying to work
that's
out
what I'm
the
saying.
math
I'm
on
at
that.
+7.
But
I
You don't even
really
need speakers for that.
just music mixing period is all about, you've got some stuff in your room and maybe you've got 4 pairs of speakers and you listen in the car, maybe you just mix on Oratones or NS10s on the floor, like whatever. And what does it sound like when it goes out the door? Does it work on most people's systems? And that's the end of it to
Well,
me.
what is it? Because I don't understand. What is the Dolby curve? Is it like the Academy Dolby thing that they use for movie theaters?
As far as I know, it's exactly the same curve, right? They
no, it's a
modified it
modified
little bit.
version. It's not as steep.
that
Yeah, it's
doesn't
not
make
as
any
steep.
sense.
It's not as steep.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure that the theories behind it are all very, very sound, but I don't. It's like someone
not
telling me I
mixing-
need to make my room flat.
Right.
We're not mixing stuff for movie theaters. though. I
No,
mean,
exactly.
Jesus.
It just wants to translate. If it translates, it translates.
Because I mixed a movie for the Rolling Stones a few years ago, and it sounded great in my room, but then when I played it in a movie theater through the Dolby curve, it sounded terrible.
So that's
you know,
my question.
and I had to come up with a reverse curve to make my mixes sound right in the movie theater.
Yeah, and if it's going to play there, then that curve is really important.
Yeah,
because it's
but-
part of the playback.
So
but,
is there,
but you can tell when you listen to TV shows that are mixed in a mix stage when it was mixed with that curve, because you can't hear what anybody's saying.
Well, that, funnily enough, is also the whole integrated loudness thing. It's just like with songs. I was playing stuff in the PMC booth today, and the one rock track is way quieter because it doesn't have quiet sections. And it's the same with the movies. The reason they can make the chase scenes so loud is because they've made the dialogue completely inaudible.
Yeah,
so the quiet
right.
scenes
Exactly.
are really quiet.
I know. And then at home, on your system at home,
I'm
it's,
sitting there like this
yeah.
all day. Yeah.
I know you're constantly with the volume control.
So if you want, you want your Atmos mix to sound loud, tell them to do a really quiet intro and a really long fade.
so is there a danger if you mix with the curve off? Is your mix going to not translate as well to some of these other devices though?
No.
It'll
Theater.
translate
I mean,
better.
Not if your
As far
room
as
is
I
not if your
know.
room is properly set up and calibrated.
Calibrated with time alignment, or
Time
calibrated
alignment,
with curve?
Well, time alignment and just
Generally,
just
cute.
a general room. Like I mean, you don't need serious EQ, but if
It should
I
sound
mean, even in
right.
stereo, if your
Yeah.
monitoring is screwed up, you're gonna have a shitty mix.
Right.
Yeah, that's
right.
So,
And that's
but
a
yes.
really important distinction to make. There's a difference between what we're talking about with the Dolby curve, which is applied broadly across your whole system, versus having your room tuned.
Yes.
That's two different
Two different
things, and you
things.
absolutely have to have your room tuned. Because if it's hard to get two speakers to play back correctly, imagine with 12.
Okay.
Well, you should get your room constructed right
Correctly,
first
yes.
before you even start tuning.
Yes.
Get make sure you have a place for your bass to go and
Exactly.
get rid of that standing wave.
Right. But the
in the
Dolby
room.
curve goes on top of
Of the
room
tuning.
tuning. And I think room tuning is a personal thing. We use the Dolby curve in the big room, like the big universal rooms and stuff like that. I don't use it in my room right
Okay.
now. I think the delays are important.
Well,
Super
I
important.
want to ask you, why is that important?
The delay for the speakers?
Yeah.
Because most people's speakers are not completely equidistant. So
But what?
if your
equidistant
speaker
to what?
to each other, to where you're sitting.
To where
So
you're
if-
sitting, but what if you move around? I mean, does that mean you always have to sit in exactly the same spot for it to sound right?
But that's your starting point. So if you
See,
are
this
sitting in the
makes
right
no
spot,
sense to me.
if
Yeah,
your
that-
if your
I-
rear speakers are
get-
farther
yeah,
back, farther
well,
away,
it's like-
Because you should be able to move. It shouldn't matter.
it still shouldn't matter.
But why?
But if you're making
does
a
it matter at
judgment
all?
on the bass or whatever, I think the idea is that you're gonna make that judgment best from whatever that sweet spot that it was
Right.
tuned from, what the delays is. But
But like
Like
my
you said,
room
yeah,
doesn't
I
have
wanna
any
move around.
delays.
I don't- yeah.
My speakers are farther back and
yours aren't that far back. Your
a
rear
little
speaker,
bit, not much.
Not,
Yeah,
mine are
they're pretty
further than
equidistant, I
yours.
guess.
Yeah.
But
It snaps it into focus pretty.
Yeah.
I just don't
You have it,
see
it-
the delay thing, and I think it's so subtle. I mean, we're talking about microseconds.
Millisecond, like
Milliseconds.
less than
Yeah.
less than milliseconds.
Yeah, tenths of
gotta be less than
milliseconds.
that.
Oh, 100,
Yeah,
yeah, it
hundreds.
can
Is,
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So if
one of
you-
my biggest
okay.
problem with the renderer was up until 2 weeks ago, the delays in the renderer were in milliseconds, which was useless.
Which is
because
too much.
far.
But
10 feet-
turn them
10
on and
feet
off
away.
and tell me that really makes any difference at all.
I mean,
And I would have to say, I don't think it
I'll
does.
say once I
I don't
got my
think it's necessary. I really don't.
once I got my speakers set up and I played stuff, it sounded great. And then Dolby came and tuned the room and did the time alignment, and it was shocking how much better it sounded.
Really?
Yeah, it was night and day to me.
I had the same experience at our place.
Wow.
And our
That's
speakers are
surprising.
equidistant.
Yeah,
And
very
it-
strange.
Right. So that,
So they're
that
equidistant,
conceptually
and you-
should
and
take
then
that
you
whole
had to
thing out of
delay
the
them?
equation. Yeah.
tiny, tiny, tiny amount. I think it was less than.
Clearly, we've got all this figured out.
Right. Yeah.
Can I just add one thing to that? Because
just one.
Just one. I had two, but I'm only going to say one of them. So I was talking to a film mixer and explaining, like, I mean, my room is small. Andy Popford from Dolby, I've known him since college, and he was just visiting and like, let me measure your room and see if you could even do Atmos. And this was probably 2 years before I got set up. And he said, you can just make it. So it's the smallest room you can do a real Atmos setup in. I'm talking to a film mixer and explaining that because I don't externalize well anyhow. Like I have to turn around to make sure the stuff is actually in the back sometimes. And he said, we'll just add 10 milliseconds to the height and the rears. And I'm like, what? And he said, we do it all the time in small mix stages. And it's awesome because all of a sudden you're past the point where things meld into each other.
Right.
And it just sounds like I have a bigger room. So I have the time alignment that we did during the thing.
Right.
And then I just added 10 milliseconds to everything except the front and the wides. And it's awesome. I can actually hear the stuff in my speakers properly. And it hasn't ever given me a problem with a mix. So
Okay.
But you don't walk around the room very much.
I can. It's so small.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, see, I walk around.
Yeah,
I walk outside of the speakers.
Yeah.
And my speakers aren't in the walls, and so it's got to sound pretty much the same.
Yeah, exactly. But when I'm sitting in the chair, like I couldn't find the height speakers. It would all just sort of collapse down for me. But now it's really easy to hear.
So that's a big question because, as we said, a lot of engineers are going to want to get into this, and some are concerned about the size of the room. I mean, shit, Steve, you've been to my room, and you said, I can't believe you got a room this small to sound this good.
Pretty small room.
So, do you have any thoughts about that or advice to other people about size of your room and where you can and cannot get away with it?
I have no idea. I mean, again, I have actually had more problems mixing in bigger rooms, personally.
Interesting.
Because, bigger rooms, you need bigger speakers, and suddenly the rear speakers are way back
Well, then the
behind
delays start to
you.
make
And,
sense.
yeah.
If it's that
so,
big.
but no, it's, if you know your room, it's fine. If you have a shitty room in stereo, you're gonna have a worse room in Atmos. That's
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
One thing, like when I had my, when lockdown happened and I moved everything into my living room, literally, at the time it was Guerrilla Studio, and like literally we like cleared all the furniture out of this, and I like put two speakers up on this side of the room and turned something on and went, okay, and then I took the two speakers, I didn't know what the room was gonna sound like, put them on the other side of the room, turn the speakers up. I'm like, okay, that's the way the room should face. And then I turned around and went, well, there's gonna be two speakers on the crappy side of the room too. So, and I went through a thing thinking about designing a new room. I was talking about building a new room, and as soon as you say Atmos, studio designers, their head explodes, because now they're not dealing with sound coming one way, they're dealing with sound coming every way, and it just complicates all kinds of stuff. So it's a thing, but I think it would be more appropriate to make sure you have the appropriate size speakers for your room. If you have a big room, you need big speakers. If you have a small room, you probably don't want really huge speakers.
Oops.
Unless you're Andrew.
That's why you don't
But
have
he
any
just
room in
delays
your-
everything.
Yeah,
So-
that's part of why.
So what we decided is everybody does it differently.
Everybody does it. Well, and I stressed out about the placement of everything, and I called a friend and said, I've already drilled so many holes in the ceiling, and it's really getting scarred up. And so he told me, he said, just put a mic stand at the listening position, make twine equidistant from that to all the tweeters, and start with that. So I did that and was still stressed out about it. And then Jonathan from Dolby showed up, and I was like, so placement of the speakers? And he's like, oh yeah, looks great. And then that was it. I was like,
Well, I did the same thing when I was setting up my room, and I was like, I got it. And then I went, wait a minute, I mixed at Capitol. That was a big room.
Yeah.
Those rear speakers were
Way
way,
back.
the hell
Yeah.
back there. And it was like, well, that worked. So, you have to do level
Yeah,
compensation.
definitely level.
But I have yet to be, I think, in a Dolby Atmos mix room, like proper mixing room, where the speakers were equidistant. I have yet to
Well,
find one.
theirs is.
You
Yeah,
guys.
yeah.
Okay. That's really the only one. Every room
yeah,
I've seen
almost
built
everybody,
because at Universal we were putting speakers in the wall, and all that kind of stuff, and the rooms are not square. They're not
Yeah.
supposed to be. So it's
Well, there's also, you got to consider traffic in a room too,
Yeah.
you know, so there's,
there's always a door in the wrong
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
There's always a
I remember
window.
when 5.1, we were first talking about 5.1, and we were all, much of us, Matt and George, Massenberg, and some other people got together, and we were discussing, okay, where should the rear speakers, the surround speakers be? And there were people, all these theories about what angle. And I just said, man, I put them where nobody's going to bump into them. It's fine. You know what I mean?
How practical you think.
Like, that's one of the things that killed 5.1 is that the speaker setup wasn't the same as theatrical 5.1. So you get someone with a home stereo and like, oh, I can't listen to 5.1 music. And like, they wouldn't bother because you had to move everything, supposedly.
Let's talk about the naysayers. So, as you've gotten into Atmos, I'm sure all of you have encountered just as many people as I have saying, "Oh, that's just another 5.1 quad boondoggle. I'm not going to do that. You're spending all this money. You're going to end up selling all those speakers." What are your thoughts on the naysayers?
Well, can't wait to get all that money for all my speakers.
And Bob's out of here.
No, in 5 years, I'm remixing all my Atmos mixes in mono.
You're doing it now in real time, aren't you? Planning for the future.
With the new Apogee mono speakers.
That's right. One giant knob for one channel.
I think if you don't like it, don't do it. Fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yep.
object-based and consumer playback and headphone things that work for a lot of people is totally different than every other format like that we've had since stereos. So there are a lot of reasons it could stick around. And Apple introducing it is what opened the floodgates for a lot of us for doing it. As you say, Spotify will eventually get off their asses and do something. Sorry, Spotify. But yeah, the adoption is so widespread on the consumer side of things, the delivery side. You don't have to get an SACD player, and so that makes
True.
it's different. Whether I'm not going to tell the future, but it's not like 5.1.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, is anybody who thinks that this is just a replay of that, which I'll be honest, I was one of those people before we switched over. When I saw what the delivery systems were, when I saw how different, as Andrew pointed out, how different this actually was from 5.1, I realized, oh, this has legs. This has a real shot. Because, and the other thing, the biggest difference between now and the 5.1 era is nobody has to rebuy a catalog, right? Nobody has to throw away their entire record collection and buy it in a whole new format. They just have to click a button on a streaming service.
Which is why the budgets are so low.
So let's talk about that. So my big concern is the race to the bottom and trying to hold a particular line of not doing things too cheaply. Do you all have a philosophy about that, or do you just kind of make it a sliding scale type of situation?
For Atmos or stereo?
For Atmos, yeah.
It seems to be a sliding scale for everything I do.
I know.
I think some of the race to the bottom is coming back to bite the people who've hired that, because the artists have to approve things. And for a long time, the labels were saying, oh, nothing goes out with the artist's approval, but they didn't know how to approve. Mm-hmm. And now more and more are getting into rooms and saying, my record cannot go out like that. And so they voiced it only $200 a song, but now they have to get people who know it. And it's just like we're saying over and over and over, there are people who are good mixers, and how many speakers you have in your room is irrelevant.
Unfortunately, what happens is the people who hear those subpar Atmos mixes, who are just kind of coming to the party, become naysayers just by virtue of having heard some bad mixes in Atmos.
Yeah, they're blaming the format for the
throwing
mixer.
out the format just because of a bad. So that's definitely an issue, and you kind of point them towards some good stuff, and maybe that makes them realize, oh, okay, it was just a bad mix.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, the first few things that I heard that they played me, I was like, I'm not getting into this. I hate that. But you get into it, and then I heard some things that sounded great, and I go, oh, this is actually pretty cool. But what I want to know is when are they going to inform the general public that this even exists?
Yeah, there's so many people who still have
Nobody has
no
any
idea.
idea. You know, we're doing all this stuff. We're all working so hard. We're having seminars. We're having panel discussions about this thing. And you walk out there and ask somebody on the street, and they won't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yep.
So
Even
when are
if
they
they're
going to
listening
tell
to
them, those people out there? And I'm not saying it in a derogatory sense.
Yeah.
I love them, but they gotta be informed about this and understand what it is and be turned on to it.
Yeah. Yep. And some of them are listening to it and they don't even know
don't
that
even
they're
know it.
listening to it because
No,
that's the
they don't.
default.
They don't
Which
even
actually is
know.
something I'd like to address because I was just talking with Brandon Carlisle and we were talking about the legacy albums and you know, and this is an issue for I know a lot of artists that they spend so much time on a stereo mix and they get it just right and they have an album and it's mastered and you know everything about it is exactly how they worked for very hard on, and you get somebody put out a quick Atmos version and maybe they didn't get to approve it, which happens quite often, but even if they do, it's a different version. No matter what, especially if it's a record that was done 50 years ago and stuff, there's just no way, as good as it might be as an Atmos version, it's not going to be the same as the stereo, and the headphone version of it is not going to sound the same as the stereo. But yet, that's what people are going to hear when they listen on one of the streaming services, and like I said, sometimes they don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a legitimate issue from the artist side, I think, and I've heard that complaint from quite a few. So, I
don't think that's, as a mixer,
Yeah.
that's not my, that's how it's being delivered to people. Like, I can't control how
Yeah, but there are a lot of
Tidal or whoever
naysayers.
is gonna put their phone together.
But don't you wish you could?
I wish I
mean,
could.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I
Well,
wish one of my problems, my phone can tell me what I had for dinner last night, what you had for dinner last night, where I was, what I'm doing, and it can't say, oh, this is an Atmos mix and switch
Yeah.
to Atmos
Yeah.
or switch to stereo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I mean,
And then it switches partway through the intro.
Yeah,
too,
15
you know?
seconds in.
Right.
and you're
Yeah,
like, yeah.
so there are those kind of things.
Well,
Yes.
Bob, you mentioned education for the general public, but what about education for your clients? Are you all proposing Atmos mixes, or are your artists coming to you and saying, I want an Atmos mix?
Well, both. I mean, you got the labels wanting the Atmos mix first.
Right.
But like, for an example, the Joe Bonamassa record, which is the second thing that I mix in Atmos, they just asked for, Kevin Shirley asked for a stereo mix. And so I did the stereo mix, and I said, by the way, here's the Atmos mix. And Kevin's like, how do I listen to that? I explained it. And then now he's a big Atmos fanatic, you know, he's a big fan. And so, and they were like, fantastic. Joe heard it and went, yeah, man, this is great.
Yeah.
And so
Are you
So it's
throwing
some-
that in as part of the package?
Well, yeah, for me, it's different than most because I do them both at the same
Right,
time.
it's not a lot
Yeah.
of
I'm mixing an analog mix,
Yeah.
and then it's just a matter of assigning some channels on my
But you had for
selector.
years, you had all
And
those 5.1
I
mixes
did the
that
same
never
thing.
had anywhere to
I
go
have 20
because
years of I've
yeah,
mixes.
but
in the
nobody ever heard them
server.
because
No one heard them.
there wasn't an Apple Music outlet for it.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So now you get to actually, I'm hoping, hear most of
People are
these
hearing.
things.
Well,
Yeah.
this is what's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that I'm doing it the same way, and it doesn't take a lot. It takes maybe half an hour more time.
Yeah.
But I'm doing it. It's the same exact mix.
It's such an ideal way. I mean, honestly, it's one mix.
Get
So-
that
Now,
SSL
let me
back.
ask you this though: do you actually sometimes, maybe not often, but do you make a special tweak that's just for the Atmos version, or is it
Yeah.
always? Yeah. So you're like, oh,
Well,
this won't translate necessarily for stereo, but in Atmos I can do this.
A good
special
example is, okay, what if you want to move something around? What if you have an effect or something like that, and you want to stick it in an object,
Yeah.
like a guitar solo, a Michael Marquardt
Yeah.
guitar
right. The
solo
folk
or something,
song. Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and okay, now what do I do for the stereo? because I'm not doing a
Right.
fold down, so it's not going to do that. So now I have to do a separate
Right.
thing, like a pan in the stereo.
That's the 5 or 10 minutes that you're talking about.
Yeah, there you go. You know, so and then sometimes it'll just there might be something. If say I'm mixing something that somebody's given me first time, and I'm doing the stereo mix, and there'll be something that I'll eliminate from the stereo mix because it's not really working in the stereo mix. But hey, man, this would be cool
Oh,
in the back or up there or something, like some synthesizer or something.
Right.
That actually.
there's room now for it.
Yeah, now there's room for it, and I'll put it into the Atmos mix, and who knows, you know?
Cool.
Who's gonna hear it?
Well, that's a good reason to get the Atmos version,
Yeah,
so
right.
that you can, get
Almost
this
a
little extra
but that-
piece of info.
That doesn't happen often, but occasionally there's been a few little bits and pieces, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Have any of you had success with doing the Atmos mix and then deriving a stereo mix from a 2-channel down mix? And in other words, going Atmos to stereo versus stereo to Atmos. Has that worked?
I did it once, and I thought it worked well because of the style of the music. It was very static, almost kind of like a, jazz record, just band in a room kind of a thing. So there was nothing moving, and I just started with Atmos, kind of got my general placement for it. And it was another thing where every song was going to be the same, picture. It's not going to
Yeah,
change from song to
that'll
song.
work,
'cause-
yeah.
So in that case, it worked. And I got to say also, there was something I noticed that the down mix, just what it did sonically was somehow pleasing. I liked the sound of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
So that
That's
wasn't that wasn't there for in the regular stereo. So
That's
there was this
interesting.
quality. Yeah, I noticed that at first, but it worked. Yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
Cool.
I'm looking for more opportunities where that would work because that like it's close as I can get to what you're doing, where it's just one mix once and you don't have to
Yeah.
do a whole
Do
one
two
and a whole-
separate
yeah,
mixes.
Yeah.
I don't think any of you have any questions, right? So let's open it up for questions. Nate, I don't know if you have a way to record those people.
If you could just repeat the question, if you might,
Just yell.
Okay.
and just yell.
Okay. So you can raise your hands.
Chaz?
Oh, no, I was just telling him that his camera died over here, just shut down.
Oh, thank you.
Oh. Okay. So we're gonna start here.
My question is, and so much respect for what's at the table there. Thanks, guys. This is amazing to hear you talking about it. My question is, after decades of doing stereo mixes on a certain DAC and converting my room to 714, and having Terry Thomas come down and tell me how it's supposed to be dialed and all of this stuff, I had to come up with a patch-based solution to switch from like normal stereo work that I'm used to. And then, now I'm in Dolby mode, so now I'm gonna listen to the curve and put all these same speakers in use. And I'm listening to you say, I don't mix with the curve, and I'm like, my mind is like exploding because I'm thinking like, I'd love to get on one DAC, one controller, and just blow that off, because I'm used to working in stereo, but is that something that you would actually recommend? Because I'm always a little uncomfortable switching over, because like, all right, all of a sudden I'm pushing more top end than I was pushing in the way I've been working all the time. No one's complained on the delivery side, and it doesn't bug me that much because I'm still doing two mixes. I don't know how you're achieving, the second question is, how are you achieving one mix for both?
He's Bob Clearmountain.
I really hate to do another plug.
I'll make that a given, but my primary question would be, should I just blow off the curve and just leave the delays? I mean, I understand for localization why the delays are important for your initial sweet spot. But I don't know if I should be bothering getting used to two curves in my room, essentially hampering it.
I don't think you need two curves. I think if you get your room right, and whatever it takes, if you need to do some EQ on your speakers, then that should be the
If it's
same,
right for
basically.
stereo, you would say it's right for all of it?
Well-
if I'm used to it.
And hopefully there's not a
I
drastic
don't know.
difference
It
between the two of them.
depends
if
on
there's a
your
drastic
room.
difference, then you
I mean, the
gotta.
LR would be the same, and all the speakers are the same.
it's just
So the
it's hard
delays
to
make
say.
perfect sense because now there's more speakers in the room. The delays should make sense. But does the curve make sense?
I think you'll find, and because I went through these curve arguments with tons of people for a long time, if you go back and forth, there's really very little difference.
Very
Yeah.
little difference. Okay.
The curve is pretty subtle.
Yeah, it's subtle.
So, I mean, you'll hear it. I mean, you'll definitely, if you're flipping it on and off, you'll hear it. But if you're comfortable in the room you're in, why change it? That's kind of my philosophy.
Yeah, and this
And that was my argument the whole time. It was like, why was Capital C, which has been a great mix room for all these years, why are suddenly we changing the speakers?
Yeah, right.
Our setup, we actually have a separate set of stereo speakers that doesn't have any tuning on it at all, because we set up in what had been Matt's studio for 20 years. He was in the middle of working on a bunch of projects. Obviously, we can't just uproot everything mid-mix. But we have switched things between listening on those stereo speakers and then listen to them on our Atmos array, and it's pretty much what Steve said. Is it different? Yeah. Did it change, like drastically change the mix between the two? No. It sounded good in both places.
Okay, so we won't tell Carrie, or we won't tell Al. We won't.
I already told him.
We've texted him already. It's too late. You're in so much trouble. Eric Schramm, you had a question?
I was just curious about the dimensions of Andrew's room versus your room versus Bob's room.
I don't know.
Because
I mean,
Andrew said that his room was really small.
I think my room's smaller than your room, though.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I'll let you have the small room.
Okay.
I don't
Thanks.
remember the dimensions, but the reason it worked is because I've got a peaked roof with these crazy old oak beams that I could put my height speakers
That was
on.
my other question was what were the physical dimensions?
Yeah,
of
so
the
that roof, and I've been really lucky, every studio I've had at home has always had that not flat roof thing, and so acoustically,
Right.
it feels like a much larger room than it is.
Gotcha.
But
You
I
should just come over to my
remember-
house and I'll show you my room.
I mean, yours is essentially a bedroom.
What?
It's essentially a bedroom.
Right, but for some reason none of the walls are parallel,
Right.
and I don't know how it got built like that, but
You
it's.
have like an angled part of the roof in there, right?
I do, yeah, because it's like a mid-century modern house, so it's like the roof is going from here to here, but it's also doing this other thing. I don't know. It just, as I said, Steve heard it.
Well, to his point, he brought up that the studios, all the rooms are not parallel walls, so
My room's four parallel walls and a flat ceiling, but I got a lot of diffusion, which gets around the parallel walls for sure. Diffusion is more important than absorption. And I'm right below the living room, and that's my bass trap. All the bass goes through the floor. And but it's an 8-foot ceiling, and so it's really tight.
diffusion
But a
really
lot
makes a
of
big difference.
a lot of rooms are like that. 8 foot, that's a pretty standard height ceiling. I mean, it's nice to have a vaulted ceiling and all that. But so I had trouble, okay, what kind of speakers am I going to fit up there without hitting my head? And but it's kind of cool because all that ambience up there, it lives in my height speakers, right? So I don't have any ambience naturally. It's just it's fiberglass.
Right.
And so I have to create that, which I don't know. I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned it, but I think maybe that might help my mixes because I'm trying to make it sound like I have a vaulted ceiling.
Yeah, because your mixes are really suffering. I'm joking.
Avalon is a great 5.1.
Oh, thanks. And speaking of that, apparently there's a supposed Atmos mix of that, that exists. Don't listen to it because it's unauthorized. Nobody knows who did it or where it came from. But we're doing it in July. Brian Ferry and Rhett Davis are coming over. And we're gonna.
But it's on
properly.
the streaming services? Yeah.
It's
Apparently
out.
it is.
Well, so someone just mixed
I don't
the
know
5.1.
Yeah.
what it is. I haven't heard it, but somebody told me, "Oh, did you do that?" Like what?
That's an interesting.
Well, that's
How
why
does
I
it get by the gatekeepers?
Man, I don't know, but this happens a lot. I think from what I understand.
That's why I was asking you about Some Girls, because that's streaming in Atmos.
Uh-oh.
Well, I didn't mix Some Girls, so
Right,
right,
somebody
yeah.
else did that. I don't
Yeah.
know
Okay.
anything about that.
All right. I thought all things Stones would go through you. so-
No, unfortunately, they don't.
Okay.
I wish.
Other questions? Yeah.
This, because this is related, question for Bob. In regards to mix rebuilds, when you're remix building a catalog song, say like when you do Avalon, are you recalling the SSL as if it was a remix? Are you able to
Well,
recall
Right.
a mix?
the original mix I can't recall.
Okay.
But I really did. I did 5/1 mixes of that album.
So you recall
And-
those and start off those?
Well, I would, except it's I'm looking through all my recall notes. It's the only thing I've done that I lost the notes. I don't know whether I have the floppy disk for the SSL, and I lost the notes. So I'm gonna have to start. But I tell you what, the original stereo mixes, I did 2 mixes a day
Right.
on an 8-hour session.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that difficult. You know, it's a pretty straightforward
Yeah,
album
yeah.
to mix.
On an
Mix it in a
SSL,
week.
or was that on the?
On an SSL, yeah. Yeah.
Chaz?
I've got 2 quick questions really. First one, has anyone messed with Atmos and Cubase or Logic or anything like that yet, or not really?
I have.
Okay. Your experiences, I'm just,
So I'm a native Pro Tools user, so obviously I'm gonna have that basic discomfort of this isn't where I live every day. I think that the idea of the Logic specifically, Nuendo, I've done a little bit of work in. Work is too strong a word. I've messed around. I like the idea of the renderer being a part of the DAW, but in practice, it's not as seamless as the companies that make the DAWs would like you to believe. You still need to know everything about using the renderer. There's a few things that it does, more sort of seamlessly DAW-like, but the things a lot of the things I should say that will trip you up using the 2 separate pieces of software can trip you up within one piece of software as well.
That's interesting.
You do really have to, at least to me, it felt like, okay, if I was going to live with this every day, and I have a friend in Chicago who he does a ton of Atmos mixing in Logic, and he said the same thing, to the point of even sometimes he'll use the standalone renderer instead of the built-in renderer.
I
in
talked to
Logic.
somebody like that mixes in Logic. That said
Yeah.
there some things they use the renderer for.
Yeah, because you don't have all the same facility in the Logic renderer as you do in the separate one.
Interesting.
Is it easy to connect Logic to the renderer?
It's pretty similar to Pro Tools. You
Okay.
gotta spit out time code and all that stuff.
A bridge situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question.
second question is, we have cats in our recording studio, so we were wondering from Andrew, how the heck do you keep the cats away from your Height speakers?
Scat Matt.
Oh, they've looked at them. They can't get there.
Okay,
It's,
fair
yeah.
Because in a few of your Andrew talk sauce of people things, I thought I saw them up over the modular synths.
Yeah, they love sleeping on top of the front speakers too. I had to
Okay.
put stuff on them so
Okay.
that they have a place to hang out.
Yeah,
Get a dog. The dog just
Try
sits on the floor.
to deal with an analog console and your cat's walking all over
Yeah.
the console, and you come in the morning, you're like, oh shit, what's going on?
I didn't bust all that.
Doesn't Apogee make a cat product?
Apogee Scat Matt. Yeah. Do that, yeah.
Case.
Hey, first of all, thank you for all your time. Appreciate it. My question's a little off topic, so I hope it's okay. So I'm new to the game, and I'm finding myself in the studio 12, 14 hours. Just like I lose track of time.
That's your first
Forget-
mistake.
Yeah, forgetting to eat. And you all seem like you're in pretty good shape, and you've been doing this a long time. Any advice on how you set boundaries to stay healthy and physically
Put the
sound?
studio in your living room. So that when it's dinner time, you
Instead of the kitchen, is
Yeah.
that what the other
Well,
option is?
yeah,
Stop
exactly.
at dinner time. Just stop.
Stop.
No matter what.
And
You know, it's
let
just a
artists know ahead
record.
of time, I presume, that like we're gonna be set. That's the thing.
He's in a funny position though. He works at Hyde Street in San Francisco.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
commercial
That's some
studio.
constitution.
It's a
I've
little.
done some records there. That's
Yeah.
a cool little studio.
It's historic, and it's
Yeah.
we have the need 8038 now, so it's It's a lot of fun.
So you're kind of at the whim of the artist, though.
Exactly, because I'm
Right.
new, so I'm.
Well, and if they're buying a 12-hour day at a commercial studio, you're working.
I'm
Yeah,
working
you're
12
working.
hour day.
You're
You're working
working
14,
through
15 hours.
Genewick.
Yeah,
100%.
100%.
So put a studio in your home.
I have a recording studio. Yeah.
Okay.
I have the next setup.
Hey,
How you doing?
doing all right. How
Good.
are you?
Oh, we're doing great. What's your question?
I'm wondering, working with artists, I feel like there's a high probability that the first time they hear an Atmos mix is the one that you're doing for them. I'm wondering how, or if you've seen any trends in the way revisions and just talking to artists about their mix is different with Atmos versus when you do it in stereo.
Well, I have to say that when I try to sell Atmos to artists, the first mix they hear is Rocket Man.
Never ever play them their song first.
Right.
Never
Yeah.
ever do that.
We made that mistake, and Steve straightened us out on it.
Yeah, I play them something else to give them an idea of what's possible. And Rocket Man's a good icebreaker for me. My kids, of course, are sick of it. And they're like, do we have to hear Rocket Man again? So that's what I do. But
Yeah, just don't play them their stuff first. Get them acclimated to what it is and what it's going to be, and then hit them with their stuff.
Yeah, I feel like everybody has an idea. Like they look around, they see all the speakers, and I did too. And then when you actually hear it, it's not what you thought it was going to be. It's great, but it's different. And if that first experience, while they're kind of letting all that set in, is listening to their music, they will freak out.
I've done it a couple of times, and thankfully it wasn't disastrous.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, you got to proceed with caution there. Yeah.
But in terms of the mix fixes, I don't know what everybody else's experience has been, but they generally are pretty similar to stereo mix fixes.
Or I've gotten. Can you put that over there?
Yeah.
Can you put
Right,
that,
right,
like,
right.
Can
Can
you
we
put-
make it
Can you make
more-
it bigger? Can
Yeah.
you make it wider? That kind of stuff.
yeah, and I mentioned the whole like perspective thing. The mix revision that I got the other day for the first time was, can we have the band here and all the reflections back here instead of being encircled by the band? That was the mix fix that I got, which was a quick fix.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
yeah, Lidge.
Are you all describing conversations that took place with the artist in your own studio? Or did you send it to the artist and then they gave you feedback?
Oh, that's a great
from
question.
Just a listening environment?
Both.
Both.
You guys all pay attention what the artists say?
Again, he's Bob Clearmountain.
Yeah, that's right. And we're
Kidding.
not.
Once again, just a joke. we all have to pay attention.
I try to
the
only
artists
work with artists that are dead.
yeah, I've been doing a lot of that.
and actually, I say that it's actually the opposite. The estates are usually worse than the
Oh,
actual
yeah.
artist. The artist is easy. It's their kids or whoever that are usually more of a problem.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just so for like before you getting started on the project, so you said we got a song coming in, right? How much consideration do you take into like preparation for the beds and the objects? Like, oh, okay, I want like this many beds, stuff like that for this one, or the objects like can I already have an idea of how much what you want to choose, like allocate on the render for what you want to play with? How does that?
It's all on the fly for me. I mean, I've set up the render. I use an object mix bus so that it's wider than the 712 that you can have. So I've got a 914 mix bus, but that's all complicated with ProTools, blah, blah, blah. But then I've just set up chunks of objects with off, near, mid, far. So I just grab far 1 and 2, but it's all completely on the fly. Like, oh, I want to do this. And then you grab some objects and you do it.
I thought everybody just started from my template. That's
Yeah, that's what you can tell. When you look at the record, it's like, yep, that's Steve's
But
template.
it's
Yeah.
from
yeah.
4 years ago, by the way.
But it's setting. It's like a template for a stereo mix. It's just to get you going so you can be creative. But I think like trying to figure out what you're going to do before you start doing it, it would never happen.
Yeah, that's
You'd
too
always
much
change your
thinking.
mind.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of discussion. I feel like it's especially online about bed versus object versus and I think in practice, at least for us, the we use what we use based on what's easiest for us. Matt's older than I am. He's a generation before me. He has done 5.1 mixing. He's comfortable with the idea of the bed. He understands objects, but he will tend to default towards, I want something in the stereo speakers or in the side speakers, and he'll do that. I have no problem going either way, so we'll end up with a mix based on that. I'd be perfectly fine using all objects, in terms of it sounding different, which is another debate that's out there. There's really no difference.
Not anymore.
No.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes, thank you.
The panning is technically slightly different.
Slightly
but
different,
whatever.
yes.
And the only reason I have everything set and I don't change it is because my hope is that means eventually I will be able to crossfade mixes. Because all my objects, the distances won't change.
Right, yes.
I'm probably just, it's never going to happen, or it won't have anything to do with that. But that's my theory.
Yeah.
Is that that'll technically allow that to happen.
Well, I mean, we came up with that scheme so we didn't have to think about the binaural mix afterwards.
Yeah, and then you can
did it
name them.
as we did it, and it never changed. And I mean, my binaural setup hasn't changed in 4 years. It's always the
Because
same.
why would it? I mean, 128 objects is a hell of a lot of objects.
Yeah.
So you just pre-allocate and use what you want.
Really use all 128?
No, I've never used them. That's what I'm saying.
I did it once,
I used to,
just for
maybe.
fun.
Yeah. No, I'm the same as you. I've got my sort of
Usually
mix
just-
bus thing, and
Usually
then
just the bed for me.
stuff that wants to move. And I'll use more than that because I use Spanner, which is great plugin from Cargo Cult. So you can have a 712 input and a 712 output and helicopter stuff all over the room. But obviously, that needs 10 objects to do it. But yeah, usually it's a couple.
Yeah. I mean, I use a lot of objects, but I have an object bed. My first 25 objects don't move. So.
So I was just wondering, look at you, and thank you, Matt. This is a really nice panel discussion that you've organized. And then I look around the room, and I just wonder how, or maybe this isn't something that you guys, when I ask it, you'll be able to really comment on, but I don't see a lot of women in this.
Yeah, why is that?
Really?
That's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely not
I
right.
was just like wondering, where are they?
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
There is one of the greatest in this space is a woman, and it's Leslie Ann
Leslie Ann
Jones.
Jones, right?
She's
Yeah.
great. She's
Where is she?
amazing.
She's in the Bay Area. She works at
No, I meant
Skywalker.
why is
Oh,
it-
she's here.
She's over
there.
She's over there.
doing
I
that.
saw her earlier
She's
today.
Busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
She's
but
got
it's
a lot
always
going.
been the thing. It's always been a locker room industry,
Yes.
I know,
and
it's-
white men who are old vote for Grammys, and I mean, it's always been that way, and it changes very slowly. And there are a lot of people advocating, but
More women, definitely.
We're
How do you
making-
get- How do you get younger women and girls?
there are
to
people like in
see
the
here?
discussions we've had. There are
Yes.
people who are actively doing. There are organizations in lots of different cities for female engineers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Carrie Keys, who I think does monitors for Pearl Jam, has Sound Girls. She's brilliant, and anytime, at least for working class audio, and when I reach out to Carrie and say, "Can you connect me with this woman engineer?" Like within an hour, I get an email back. Carrie says you're looking for me. I know I look up here at all of us, and I threw this panel together kind of quickly, and a lot of it was based on pre-existing relationships, and because we're all part of this, there's a mixing network that we're all kind of part of on a text thread, and it was based on that, with no, I didn't think it out clearly enough to say,
Oh, this
hey, we
was-
need full representation here.
Well,
This wasn't to.
no, but it is a problem.
But it is, yeah.
A lot of it is that women are way smarter than
That's-
any of us. And we're
Would never
intimidated.
get it.
Right.
I will say that the text thread that Matt is talking to, one of the discussions that we had when we put it together early on and are pushing for is Atmos has presented an opportunity in it's a knowledge base that nobody has. It's very new.
It's true. It's for
And
everybody.
if we're going to solve the issue that, unfortunately, when I started in the business, I thought it would get better over my time, and it hasn't. And what I've realized is we need to get more women in at the beginning of their careers now, especially with an opportunity like this where there's a fairly level playing field, right? And
Help us figure it out.
yeah,
please.
let's bring them in, and we'll all talk amongst ourselves about how can we, we have opportunities when we have assistance positions or people to do mix prep for us or whatever. Can we look at bringing in women and people of color in those positions?
Representation is so important.
Yes.
Yeah.
See a woman represented in a panel like this.
Yes.
Right.
I understand the
Right.
limitations that you have. That's so important because then younger women, other women, and other diverse populations can start relating to that individual.
Absolutely.
The other thing I'll
100%.
say is, like, I'll go speak at schools and stuff like that. And again, not to say that the problem is solved in any. When I look out, I see a lot more women than I used to.
Yeah.
I think it's starting to change more recently. So there aren't many women who have 30 years of mixing under their
Yeah.
belt. So, I mean, there's some out there and they're very good. And, when we were at Capitol, we always tried to hire more women and all that. So hopefully it's changing. Because, like I said, when I go speak at schools and stuff like that, it's definitely, it looks different than it did when I started doing that 20 years ago. So
Just by you entertaining that question in your comments, I think helps other people, more diverse population, realize that you're open to that.
We're 100% open
Yes.
to it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that the
We have a lot of
demise
conversations about this.
the demise of the traditional recording studio is actually one of the best things
Yes.
for diversity
Yeah.
because it was really, if you were a female engineer at Sound City, you were getting hammered all day. Bands would be worse around a
Yes.
female engineer to see what she would take. And Sylvia Massey is the poster child for that,
Yeah.
and she would give worse than she was given. But, that's really difficult to stand up to the point where a lot of male engineers would not have lasted if they were treated that way.
Yeah.
So now, especially in the UK, it seems, there are unbelievable numbers of younger female engineers and producers who are making ridiculously good records.
Yeah.
And also the universality of computer audio and things, so that you don't need to go into the studio system in order to get introduced to this, and so I think it just broadens.
But I will say, as I go around and record, because I still do a lot of recording, I've had more women assistant engineers in the last 5 or 6 years than I ever saw in the 20 years before that. So again, it's still an issue. I'm not saying that the issue is solved, but I do see it getting
And that's
better.
it on some level. Like, this is a tough, the recording business, the music business in general, is a high rate of failure business,
Tough for
right?
everybody,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
hard for everybody. So the fact that we're seeing more numbers at the lower levels speaks to hopefully what we're going to see as time goes on. The people rising through the ranks will be those, look different than this group up
Right.
here.
And what do you think that brings to your creative element? Does it add to it?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Yes.
do it. Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
at least
No.
my experience is I've seen very few female engineers completely lose the plot trying to get a snare sound. Seriously,
I see a lot of guys.
there's
A
a
lot of
more
guys.
consistent emotional listening thing going on. And, I don't want to generalize because it's ridiculous to do that, but that's been my experience.
But thank you for the question.
Yes.
Great question.
Good question.
Yeah.
I hate to have to follow up that question. That was a beautiful question. That was amazing. Because when you have to pivot. That's another thing. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
For me, I'm just now getting into it. Got the speakers and everything. What were you guys doing in the beginning when it comes to monitoring time delay? I'm trying to find solutions to where I can use what I currently have to do, time delay and EQ, and just to be able to control all the volume of my speakers and globally listen to the mixes that you guys are doing, so that way I can have a good starting ground. It's a little bit easier with stereo, but now it's like all new territory when it comes to, okay, this Atmos mix that I'm hearing in my room, is this accurate? Am I making the right decisions? what tools are you guys using to be able to, or would you recommend using, that would keep me from like per se having to get a turn off? Because I
Sure, I understand
Yes.
that.
You know what I mean? Because
Yes.
that's a big. I think Callie's doing an awesome thing with
Right.
what they're introducing and creating products that are good but not limiting.
All right,
Yeah.
I'll start and pass it along. I chose a Grace M908 as my controller, and to me that's the holy grail for me. But since I've gotten that, you can now with the renderer having the ability to do EQ and time alignment, you can look to less expensive interfaces or different interfaces that don't necessarily have all the DSP elements from Universal Audio, from Apogee. So
The expensive part. The expensive part is you've got to have a way to control the volume evenly across 12 speakers, right? And there's no, I think what everybody wants, and I wanted it too, is a solution that's in the same price point area as stereo, and it doesn't exist right now. You're looking at a $4,000 to $5,000 interface plus a remote for that interface, unless it's one. I know Antelope's got one. The Galaxy 32 will. You can
Pro with the R1 remote, right?
the Antelope actually you can do the volume right on the front. I think you might be able to so if you can mount the interface at your listening position, you can use it without a remote. Same with the Apogee as well. Yeah,
But there's also a knob on the renderer.
there's a knob on the render as well.
that scares me though.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
can
me
be
too.
scary. Yeah.
Two quick things though about trying to set your own room up, which they're only going to get you in the ballpark, but they work. So time alignment, take a click track with a click that is very, very short. You have two outputs. You have one that loops right back into the interface, and then you have a microphone that goes back to the interface. Put the microphone near your listening position and record every single speaker individually. And you've got a delay between the one that's going straight through a piece of wire, so it's speed of light plus whatever the delay in the converter is. And you've got another one that's out through the air, hits the microphone and comes in. You find out which is the loudest, you measure the distance in your DAW, and that's however many microseconds, and then you type it into the renderer. For EQ, just get pink noise and go from speaker to speaker. And some of it's going to be where your head is and it's going to change, but you'll hear the drastic EQ differences, like, wow, there's a big hole in the mid-range on that speaker. EQ it a bit, and that'll get you close enough to say, yes, I'm hearing other people's Atmos mixes correctly. Whether that means you can do your own in there, who knows?
Are you foreseeing anything cool when it comes to like maybe utilizing like a Stream Deck or something along those lines? I know you have like something unique.
Well, I might have written an app.
I love your Stream Deck.
He's Andrew Scheps.
Yeah, so if you've got an interface that uses Dadman, then there's something for the Stream Deck that will completely control the monitor section of that. So that can give you a knob that will do it on the Stream Deck Plus. But like we said before, the monitor controller is the thing. You've got to have a knob somewhere that turns your system up and down and is even.
There's stuff coming too. I mean, the SonarWorks multi-channel thing works great. It does work well. I think we're starting to see those kind of things catch up now. Unfortunately, it's not inexpensive to do this. Even on the inexpensive side of it, there's still an investment to make there to do it right.
Yep.
And my opinion, if you're not going to do it right, just don't do it. You're not helping anybody, including yourself, to do it wrong. Because if you set your room up screwy, your mixes are going to be screwy, and then you're putting out bad mixes, and nobody's going to hire you anyways.
Plus, the process is so complex anyway, and if you have any hindrances in the way, of a screwy setup room, then, like Steve says, you shouldn't do it if you're going to do it that way.
Just to give you an idea, because I feel like we might have done one of the cheapest sort of pro level rooms, because I was looking for every budget solution I could possibly find that would allow us to do work at the level we wanted to do. And I think in the end, including the Dolby room tuning and everything, I would estimate we spent around $25,000.
That's probably about right.
Any cheap speaker is not cheap when you buy 12 of them.
Exactly.
So yeah, the Galleys are probably like, I don't know, like $5-6 grand for IN8s or LP8s for a 714.
Funny you mention it. Yeah, the system.
Get that man a mic.
The system that is in here, that if anyone is interested to hear any of these Atmos mixes that they just talked about, we'll play for you. Represents about $5,000 retail investment.
Okay, so $5 grand for there, then you're talking another 4 or 5 grand for your interface.
For an interface and a monitor control.
Yeah,
Yeah.
10 grand, and then cables.
Cabling, it's all the, that extra, we've nailed it, and then it's stands and cabling and
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
But also, like, you might, something with a big price tag in the middle of that stack might you say, well, okay, I'll do something cheaper with that. But the best thing I ever did was to go with a Matrix, which is really expensive, and have everything be Dante, because I don't even own a patch bay anymore. And my audio routing is fucking crazy.
But
there is stuff flying all over the room, but it's just Cat 5e.
But I'll say this to counter the Matrix thing: the Grace, right out of the box, will do what the Matrix does, topped out for like $5 grand less.
Okay.
So.
And then the Apogee's less
And
than
then
that. Plus, you don't have to deal with Dante, which makes me crazy.
Focusrite Pro one too, right?
Yeah, which that's what you're running, right, Dave?
Yeah.
With the R1 remote.
Yep, that's what I've got.
And those are like what, 4 or 5 grand somewhere in there.
Honestly, I don't even know.
It's not bad.
Yeah,
It's got
It's
Dante,
not.
right?
It's got Dante.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
No,
they're
it
like-
doesn't have any room correction in it though.
No.
Yeah.
They're $4 grand, and then I think it's another grand for the remote.
For the Ethernet R1 thing.
Yeah.
Which is great. I had one for a while. I had
So,
Focusrite.
so
with
there's
one.
so many options.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. Does anybody have another question? Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Talking about the mixes, like sounding good in stereo, and then trying to mix it to Atmos. Do you find any like value in the production and recording being done in Atmos, and like decisions being made before you guys get it for panning and?
I would love for that to happen. It's just not happening.
Doesn't really happen. No.
It's everybody knows they're like right now. Their bread's buttered on the stereo side. I was just having a conversation earlier with someone about discussing Atmos with independent artists, and it's a real question for them right now financially whether or not it makes sense, because they can't do a physical product. Well, they can do a Blu-ray disc with it, but then who's going to distribute that, and who's going to be interested in buying it? Like, what's the market for it? Whereas stereo, you can make vinyl, and that's going to, you can see a real return on investment there, and do streaming and everything else you need to do. So it's a real question for them. Do I invest in this thing, which, yeah, it will be important 5 years from now, but I need to put gas in the van tonight. Where it's a different calculation for a big indie label or a major label that has a really deep catalog that's looking more at the sort of long tail of increasing every song streaming by 20%, 30%.
But one of the things we've said a bunch of times is about every song needs a different type of Atmos mix, and the reason is because you're pulling apart something that was done for one speaker or two and trying to make it work elsewhere. And there are a couple of bands who tracking in Atmos is insane, but if you track in quad, all of a sudden you have things for the rear. And I think artists who hear their older records in Atmos then get super excited about what they're going to do for the next record. And that's all you have to do. Get 2 more speakers in the room, then all of a sudden all the raw material will be there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Dennis,
One
final
quick
question.
Do you guys, I'm coming from a post background, so do you do an external renderer? In the early days, Dolby always said, go out to an external renderer with all the Dante.
I think we're all
You
in
mean
Pro
to an
Tools,
external
right?
to an external
To a separate
computer?
computer?
To an RME.
Second RME.
Yeah.
Second computer. Yeah, I use Bridge. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
They-
you're internal on one machine.
So
I'm
Dolby
internal.
I was at a Dolby presentation given by Jordan Glasgow this morning, and he said they're thinking with the new version of the renderer that just came out, version 5.0, was the speed of computers had now caught up to the technology to the point where it made more sense to put it all under one roof, so to speak. And you can still run, if you have an RMU, you can still run 2 separate computers. But I know for us, we run a single machine. We have 2 rigs, and we're running a single machine, and we've never had an issue.
Then, addition to that, basically, Dolby says you only need one deliverable, because the Atmos down mixes everything.
Yes.
Comments on that?
It's great.
It's like when you
Try
have
doing it in
speakers
Sony
and small
360.
speakers.
See what you're delivering.
No.
Yeah.
The ADM is the ADM is the ADM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And you're just
it.
switching, so that's the one file and.
Well,
and
that's
stereo.
for the Atmos mix.
Right.
I mean, everything that I've done so far either has an existing stereo mix,
Okay.
or if I'm doing both, I do a stereo mix and then I do an Atmos mix.
Because like Apple.
I'm not delivering one
Right.
mix for both,
Okay.
And the stereo
but
mix,
it'll do it.
the stereo mix you're hearing on a streaming service is the actual stereo mix. It's not
It's
a full
never a
It's not a down
Right,
mix.
it's not a full down.
Yeah, and it depends on your Atmos mix, because a lot of my Atmos mixes, you wouldn't want to fold them down, because I might have something stereo between 2 side speakers, but in the stereo, I'd put it stereo between the 2 main speakers. And so this wouldn't work, a fold down wouldn't work.
Okay.
Sometimes it works, and a lot of times it wouldn't. Yeah.
Can I follow that question? So when you talk about the stereo mix and breaking it out to Atmos, you print the stereo mix, and then you start breaking it out to the Atmos to pull it through.
Well, everybody does it different. I
Yeah.
do them
Yeah.
both, print them both at the same time but I do it differently than everybody else, so that's not really valid.
All right, I want to thank Nate and Cali Audio.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
And obviously, I want to thank these guys, Total Rockstar Panel, and thank you all for your questions and showing up.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
Thank you.
yeah, I think we're
Yeah,
done.
thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, guys.
I gotta run.